What a horrible night to have a curse. One of the most memorable text boxes from the Nintendo Entertainment System era. Castlevania was back, with a brand new twist that left quite an impact on those who played it. After the simple yet brutal first release of the series, Konami went in a very different direction with the style of Castlevania II. It was no longer a short linear game with the goal of making it through 18 small stages. In fact, there were no stages at all anymore, as the world had been completely opened up to explore. Upon starting the game, Simon is in a town that seems to be free of danger. Simon can explore this town, including inside some of the buildings, and talk to everyone he sees to get clues about what has happened and what to do next. Not all of these hints are accurate, however. There are also some items needing to be purchased in town, such as the white crystal, which was very helpfully pointed out by the first person Simon can talk to. There's more that you could buy here, but the game doesn't start you with enough currency to buy anything more. And that currency is... hearts? In order to collect hearts to pay for other necessary items, Simon must venture outside of town to find some enemies. To the west of town, or just the left, as it's in a side-scrolling 2D plane, is a very dangerous marsh, which is best left avoided for now. Naturally, no one in town warns you about this, and immediately we see the flaw that most exploration games of this time have. No guidance, or at least not enough. Exploring can be fun, but there's not much to find when that's all you know how to do. So, instead, Simon should leave town in the east and enter Jova Woods. The enemies here are pretty friendly in comparison, and when Simon defeats them, they might drop hearts to pick up. Collecting hearts will also increase Simon's experience level at a rate of 75% of the heart collection, and what a horrible night to have a curse. Also new to Castlevania II was an in-game clock, with every night having a curse. After defeating Dracula previously, Simon has had to live with a curse that is slowly killing him, and he has now found out that the only way to lift the curse is to resurrect him. Simon's quest, this time, takes place 7 years after the Count's first defeat, and has him exploring around the world to enter 5 different mansions and take the parts of Dracula that were placed in them. Other effects of the Cursed Night are that monsters now appear in town, and monsters outside of towns are slightly stronger. This actually ends up being very useful for the player, since the value of hearts dropped by enemies tends to be significantly higher at night. As a result of this, nighttime ends up being the best time to collect hearts and experience while outside of mansions. However, as innovative as the day and night system sounds, there are a lot of drawbacks. The start of the game ends up being so slow while waiting for time to pass. Even if you decide not to collect the first whip upgrade, which was now a permanent upgrade compared to Castlevania I, the holy water you are required to buy in the first town costs 100 hearts, and the useful chain whip in the next town costs 150. That's 250 hearts to collect before even entering the first mansion, and delving into the main portion of the game. A slow grind that isn't helped by the speed of the game's clock. Night only lasts for 3 minutes, with a whole day lasting 6. And enemies won't always drop hearts regardless. What's worse, however, is if you're ready to buy one of the items in town and it suddenly turns to night. If this happens, you'll have to wait through the whole night because nobody's out of their homes and you can't go inside any of the town buildings. Now you may be thinking, can't you just grind hearts and experience right at the start and never have to deal with it again? Nope, the game knows its way around that one. Hearts are capped off at 256, a common value with 8-bit games, and there is a simple but effective method of preventing experience grinding. Each area is assigned a maximum level for gaining experience, and above that level, Simon won't get any when he collects hearts. Surprisingly, this method doesn't seem to be used much to prevent grinding, but it works well here. It's a very fair way of doing it too, because experience barely matters at all. All it does is increase Simon's health bar by 2 HP, and the maximum level to reach is 6. And really, this has very little meaning because of an element of this game that's very surprising if you played the first Castlevania. It's easy. Daytime, nighttime, inside a mansion, wherever, enemies just aren't much of a threat. I beat the game at level 5, but I probably didn't need to go past level 3. Even if you run into enemies all over the place, deaths will put you back to the spot where you just were, no penalty. There is still a game over system, where after losing 3 lives you reach the dreaded game over screen, but this still doesn't set you back to a previous part of the game. You still start again exactly where you were. All you lose is your hearts and experience collected, and if you are in need of hearts, it's really not that hard to pick them up again past the beginning of the game. Otherwise, there's really no need to grind for hearts, because you should just pick them up naturally as you go. There is such a thing as too easy, and this might be it, but there were some benefits for sure. I just would have expected the mansions to step it up in difficulty a little, but for the most part they didn't. One of the mansions later in the game only has 2 very basic types of enemies, but I guess you could say it's for the better, since the game starts to lag, slowing down immensely when only 3 or 4 enemies are on the screen at once. Now let's talk a little bit about the benefits of this game being an easier game when there's a lot to explore. The game genre Metroidvania originates from combining Metroid with Castlevania, with Metroid being noted as the first game in series to really implement 2D side-scrolling exploration as opposed to basic levels or stages. Castlevania II Simon's Quest, along with a few later releases, also expanded on this a little bit. But here's the thing, Simon's Quest does Metroid better than Metroid. I know, that's a statement that could get me surrounded like I'm Flynn Rider. Obviously, Konami toned down the difficulty of Castlevania II because they listened to me 36 years in the future complaining about the difficulty of the first game. You don't believe me? I suppose instead it could just be that they knew needing to explore the world would be better if everything wasn't so violent. Plus, if you die, starting right back at the same spot allows you to just keep going in the direction you were exploring in. Although it's unfortunate that I can't read Japanese because the main difficulty of this game is in figuring out where to go, but that can be blamed more on the hilariously terrible English translations. At this time in gaming history, Japanese developers would first release their games only in Japan. So in this case, Simon's Quest was first released in 1987, but it didn't reach North America until 1988. Sadly, they didn't have a great translation team, so it didn't appear that this was time well spent. There's the infamous typo on collecting a body part of Dracula. You now possess Dracula's heart, which was funnily enough corrected when you'd collected an item from defeating a boss. You now possess the gold knife. This, however, doesn't really impact the player anything like the vague references to places in the game without a clue of what actually needs to happen there. The general view of this game might be skewed a bit from famously being the first episode of Angry Video Game Nerd, where he specifically mentions the random tornado whisking Simon away to a mansion. He's got a point there. It's just a random cliff where Simon has to kneel for a few seconds with a red crystal equipped, and that's the intended solution. In the official English translation, there is one small mention of Deborah Cliff, which is this spot, but there's no way to even know which place the cliff is, let alone what to do. To me, most of the areas are difficult to tell apart because the floor tiles all use exactly the same pattern throughout the whole game. Although other than this, much like the first game, the graphics are top-notch for the NES. There are plenty more overly cryptic hints that don't lead to much either, such as the holy water breaking the wall of evil, or dropping garlic on the ground at a random dead end so that a man appears with an item to give you. The holy water hint leads to one of the most frustrating non-challenges of the game. That wall of evil is actually referring to random blocks in the game that can be removed by throwing holy water at them, but there's no indication of it at all. There are also several points within the mansions that just have straight up fake floors. The floor tiles are there as usual, but Simon will fall through them. This is the only real way the game has of making you lose progress, since it doesn't usually result in a death, meaning the player will have to retrace all their steps again. This stuff is just not a real challenge and doesn't have any value for this game. Now, is this game worth being angry over like AVGN was? No, I don't think so. It can be frustrating to have an easy game and just not know where to go and what to do, but there's nothing that should really make you angry. Let's actually finish the game before we start wrapping up though. After clearing out the 5 mansions and using invested oak stakes to break open the orbs containing Dracula's body parts, Simon must head back into Castlevania. I guess I didn't think too hard about it in the first game, but this was the first time I realized that Castlevania was the name of a specific place, and I hadn't yet been there in this game. In the penultimate town before this, everyone appears to be afraid of Simon or angry to see him. The final town along the way is almost deserted. The long walk through Castlevania itself is also free of any enemies, and there's a new haunting piece of music to go with it. About time for something new, too. As good as the game's soundtrack is, much like the first game, the variety in the soundtrack was down a bit. In the final room, the bags of body parts all combine together to resurrect Dracula, and the fight begins. The first time I tried it, I saw just how difficult it was meant to be, and then I had to start over at the beginning of Castlevania to make the long empty walk again. This is a bit of a weird punishment considering it's the first time in the game a death sets you back, but there are no challenges to go through again. On the second attempt, I used the gold knife and it was all over very quickly. An easy game goes out with an easy boss. There are only 3 bosses in the game in total, and all of them are easy to take out. The hardest one is optional, but it gives you the golden knife to make the others much easier, so it's worth your time. It's a bit of a shame how, even at the end of the game, it's the easy way out. The game wastes no time in getting to the end screen after Dracula has been defeated. This is where we find out why the game has kept track of how many days you've been through. There are 3 different endings you could see depending on how much in-game time it's taken for you to beat the game. I got the average ending for taking between 1 and 2 weeks. Dracula's gone, but Simon soon also dies of his wounds. Someone else will have to take care of the rest of the curses. Another sequel, perhaps? It was a much easier journey than before, and given how easy it is, that makes this game the odd one out in the series. Most people would remember it as the odd one out for other, more obvious reasons, like not following a standard stage structure and having cryptic hints. It can be too easy to be satisfying, but the exploration is at least accessible. I think it's not quite as good as the first game, but better than people give it credit for. It's a mess, but not one you'd have to avoid. Therefore, my final score for Castlevania II Simon's Quest will be 6.2 out of 10. Look, I won't sit here and tell you it's a good game, and I think I've made that clear enough. This was a great idea that maybe wasn't given enough time to be optimized. It's available, like the first game, on Virtual Console and as part of the Castlevania Anniversary Collection if you would like to try it now. And if you like the series, I would recommend at least giving it a shot. There was also a fan retranslation made so that the English text is more accurate to what the characters say in Japanese, and it's intended to be easier to figure out without a guide. Tell me, did you agree with the points I've made? What rating would you give Castlevania II Simon's Quest for the NES, initially released in 1987? As ever, thank you for watching, and please continue to be your own unique self. Oh, hello.
Let's live here together.
Yeah, sure.